Well, once again, we're back finishing the coaling tower.
Oh boy, almost done.
Really close. This week we're doing the coal chute. We did the coal door, but the coal door simply allows the coal to exit the coal tower, and from there it goes out into the coal chute, and from there it falls off into the locomotive, assuming there's a locomotive there for it to fall off into. It was really interesting to see how this thing works. We were down there, how long's it been?
Oh, about, I want to say 3 years ago.
But they did, the Friends of the Cumberson Toltec demonstrated it, and you can see that the coal chute here is balanced in the middle, sort of like a seesaw.
Right.
And so the operator can easily raise and lower it, even though it weighs probably 800 pounds.
Oh, gee.
Because it just pivots there around that pivot point. I think it's actually somewhat easier to lower it than it is to put it back up. In order to put it up, it's raised into position, but then it has to be latched in place. And there's a little, well, it's just a hook like on a storm door.
Oh man, I could see that whole thing going badly.
And don't get your fingers in there.
Right.
Anyway, he grabs his piece of chain and then just loops that hook through it, and that locks it in place. Now, one of the things I noticed is right here there's a length of rail and some weights, some big iron bars. And I think that's how they balance it. They just go ahead and build this, and then they keep adding weight to this end until it balances. So the work so far has brought us to this point where we have a working coal door to let the coal out into the coal chute. There just is no coal chute at this point to let the coal out into. So our next project is going to be to construct the coal chute. And actually the coal chute was constructed 4 years ago, and just this is as far as it got. And there's some problems with it that need to be changed, but mostly it just needs to be finished and added to the structure and made to actually operate. When the coal door is open, there's a little lip right there that sits on top of the coal chute to direct the coal out into the coal chute. And so there has to be reasonable alignment here of the coal chute to the coal door. The prototype hangs from a point almost at the middle so that it balances like a teeter-totter so that the operator can easily lower it into position. And I need to duplicate that mechanism where the more or less central brace on the door is where the attachment is for the hanging mechanism that will cause the whole thing to teeter-totter. And then the back edge of the door rides up and down on a track. And I'm just going to use some of this same brass that I used for the coal bucket track. It's a little oversized compared to the prototype, but it'll just have to do. While I'm figuring out all this balancing geometry, I'm just sticking these tracks in place with double stick tape so that I can easily peel them away from the building and lower them or raise them as need be. The coal chute needs to fit neatly between the tracks, and actually the way I built it 4 years ago was a little too wide, and so I narrowed that by the width of the wood by just popping the sides off and gluing them onto the top. That worked perfectly. Now I've also constructed the axle that will ride up and down in the track. It mounts at the very back of the door. And I'm going to take all 3 of these elements over to the paint booth and get some basic paint on them, because they'll be very difficult to paint once they're in place. And I can do a better job at the paint booth. As I like to do, I'm using Chama and Mr. Color paints. They're the same paint. Get it off Amazon. It's a true lacquer, a solvent-based lacquer. Now, if these were going to get handled a lot, I'd start off with a self-etching primer. But in this case, I think I'm okay to just start layering color directly onto the brass. I think that'll hold up and be reasonable. the inside of the track will get scratched as the axle goes up and down in there, but hey, that would happen on the prototype as well, so I think that'll look just fine. So I'm just going to layer on some black here and also mist over some lighter grays and so on to give it a more weathered appearance. Okay, now these long hanging rods that the whole mechanism teeter-totters to, I've put some tubes here at that central mounting point, and then I've found some white metal castings out of the casting bins to use as the mounts here at the top. As we've said before, we have all kinds of white metal parts that we make here in the shop, and just bins and bins and bins of parts. I just root through there and find something that I think is going to work. In this case, I found some sort of pillow block bushings that were left over from Don Hendrickson's half-inch scale drop bottom gondola project from like 20 years ago, and those will work just fine. And then I'm also going to use some nut, bolt, and washer castings and drill those out, and that'll be the bolt that holds the rod to the pillow block. There's a mounting stud on the back of this which I will have to remove, so I'm taking that over to the belt sander, and I'm just taking that mounting nub off the back of there and flattening off the back, trying to make sure I keep everything good and square so that I can come back now and drill out the middle of this through the nut and push that over my brass rod. So on the drill press, I'm making sure that I'm perfectly lined up with the very center of the nut, and then I'm just going to drill that out. I need to make sure that the casting here is perfectly perpendicular to the drill bit, otherwise it isn't gonna work very well. Anyway, there it is. A nice hole straight down through the casting that will slide neatly over the end of the brass rod and up against the pillow block. And there it is, the finished mounting brackets for the upper part of these balance rods. The lower mount is simply a brass tube that slides over the end of the brass rod, and then the rod itself is bent at a 90-degree angle. And then the axle rides up and down in the track over here, and in theory, that will cause the whole thing to teeter-totter. The axle is also held in place with double stick tape so that I can move it back and forth to properly balance this. And surprisingly, right from the get-go, the first positioning of the axle is just fine. It easily goes up and down and is functioning exactly the way it's supposed to. I'm shocked. Now it is closing a little farther than I'd like it to. I don't want it to go that tight up against the building when it's closed. And then a small other problem is it's hitting the door when it's fully open. So I'm going to make a small adjustment back here. I'm just going to, on the sander, take a little bit off the back edge of the coal chute. With the coal door open, the little lip drops right down on top of the coal chute like it's supposed to. The rods keep wanting to slide out of the tubes here because there's nothing really keeping them there. But I've had an idea on how I want to keep the two ends here from coming loose by applying a rod between the two, a thin metal rod that will keep them from coming loose. It will also provide a stop to prevent the coal chute from closing completely up against the front of the building. It will remain somewhat open as it's supposed to look similar to this here. So I'm using a very, very fine brass wire with hooks on both ends, and I can squeeze the two balance rods in and hook the hooks over that, and then put this rod across here. I'm not going to attach it so that I can easily remove it if I need to remove the coal door, but the little rod there keeps the two balance rods from being able to come out of the pivot tubes. And also you can see now that the coal door hits that rod when it's closing so that it won't close all the way. So I came in with just a little bit of water-based acrylics and got a first coat of color on everything and touched up some of the damage to the axle from moving it around. Now there's two ladders up the front of the building here for servicing the chain mechanism, all of the mechanism that runs the coal door. An upper ladder and a lower ladder. Building those the same way I built the ladders on the back of the building for servicing the coal buckets. I figure out all my spacings metrically. It's so much easier to say the proper spacing should be 13 millimeters as opposed to coming up with 13 30-seconds or some silly number like that that's so difficult to work with. So I applied a base stain here. I'm using the same Watco Danish wood oil that I'm using on the rest of the building and got a first coat of stain on here. And then everything gets touched up with acrylic. For some reason, the lower ladder here is a much more complicated ladder than the rest of the ladders. The rest of them just have rungs nailed to rails, but the lower ladder has the rungs inset into the rails. Much more complicated ladder. The lower ladder is also attached to the building, the hoist building at the bottom, and then the upper ladder, of course, is hooked to the coal bin. Because these are actually separate parts, I have to be able to separate the building into two pieces in order to move it around and put it in place on the layout. Now I'm going to apply a bit of weathering to the coal chute. Clear back when I build it, the inside of it is lined with that heavy aluminum foil that I use for a lot of things. The actual coal chute at Chama is also lined with metal, otherwise the coal would just tear the wood chute to pieces. Now I want to try coloring the metal using this ferric chloride etchant that I use on a lot of metal parts. Typically what I have to do is dunk the parts into this, and then that will remove plating and discolor the metal and color it kind of black. It's really great for a lot of different things. But historically what I've done is dunk it, and in the case of the coal chute, I want to try brushing that on there since there's no way to dunk the coal chute into ferric oxide stuff here, ferric chloride. I'm not getting much of a reaction here because, well, brushing it on, it just isn't very thick, so, you know, I'm not getting the kind of reaction I had hoped for, but it does take time. You have to, even when you're dunking something, you don't get much of a reaction for about the first minute or so. So I'm just going to brush some of this stuff on and let it sit and see if it doesn't blacken the metal. The stuff's very toxic. You have to be very careful using it. I'm wearing gloves and eye protection. The results I'm getting are pretty spotty because of the way I'm doing this by brushing it on instead of immersing it. But I think if I just keep at this, I'll get something like what I'm looking for, I hope. So a bit of persistence here. One nice thing is I can apply more acid where I want more color because I do want the metal showing through, otherwise there would have been no point doing it this way in the first place. Now in order to intensify the rusty blackness of the whole thing, I'll mix up a batch of soda water. I just use some baking soda and water and mix up a little batch of this. And again, normally I would immerse the part in that, but in this case I have to brush that over the top. And I get the same reaction. As soon as the soda water hits the acid, it foams and froths, and there's a fair amount of reaction to the whole thing. I am planning to apply acrylic weathering over the top of this. This won't be the finished look. And one nice thing about this etched metal surface is now it takes the paint so much better. If I tried putting acrylic paint directly over the metal, it wouldn't do a darn thing. But by persisting with this, I can get a pretty decent look of a dark, weathered metal surface here with even some sort of golden rust colors coming through. It really makes for a really nice weathered metal surface. Again, works so much better if you can immerse the part. So I think that's a good starting point for what I want to do here. Again, one nice thing is it will now take paint quite well with the etched surface on here. So the next thing I'm going to do is clean all of the acid off of here. So just using a damp paper towel and coming in here and making sure I get all of the acid and soda bath off of here so that it doesn't mess up anything going forward as I start applying acrylic paint. And that's not too far removed from what I was hoping for. So next up, to come in here now with some acrylic paints, mostly a flat black acrylic. I rarely use just a pure black. There's a little bit of gray mixed in here. Try to keep kind of a mixture of paints on the brush. I think it looks so much better rather than just trying to apply a uniform color. And then just dry brushing here. I'm not actually trying to paint the surface. I'm just dry brushing over what's there to enhance what's there. Okay, I think we've arrived at a point, certainly not the finished look, but all along my plan was to now apply coal dust over the whole thing because everything here is covered with coal dust, of course. And for coal dust, I'm using artist's charcoals. I use the burnt willow sticks as opposed to those compressed sticks. The compressed bricks have kind of an oil to them to help them stick to the paper, where if you just get the regular burnt sticks, they're just like a willow stick that's been charcoalized, and you can scrape those off with a blade, and those work so much better for doing weathering. And then once you get things looking the way you want, you have to secure all this in place. I use Tester's Dull Coat, just a couple of fine mists of Tester's Dull Coat over this. I don't want to use too much of it or it ruins the look. But all of this can be secured in place with just a couple of light mists of Tester's Dull Coat. Once the entire structure is finished, the last thing I'm going to do is come in here with a little touch up, a little more dry brushing, a little more air brushing, just to finalize the look, if you will. So next week we're going to be looking at the lighting. There's this cool light that we got from Locomotive Joe on eBay. He custom made this light for us to go on here. He'll do that if you have certain specifications. You can just tell him what you would like and he'll build it. So I'll be mounting this and figuring out conduit and wiring. And then there's also the awning roof that covers up all of this area to keep it out of the weather. So those are our next steps in the project. So we'll be picking it up from there. And I actually think we've only got like maybe 2 more shows on this. We've got to finish the lights and the sound system and then put the roof on it.
Right, and then pack it over to where it's going to live forever.
Oh, and that's going to be a little scary.
That's the scary part.
I hate picking it up and moving it all. Anyway,
right.
Hopefully you're going to want to follow along with all of that. And so if you're not a subscriber to the channel, please subscribe. And you can do that by clicking on the upcoming blue button. Zoink, right there, the blue button. But we're not sure how you found this video on the internet. We hope you didn't find it boring, and we will see you on Tuesday.
Right.
We'll see ya.
We'll see ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.